Okay, so sorry that I had to do this a little bit later than I anticipated because I had to go to a family dinner and then had to bring my mom to the airport because he is gonna be on vacation apparently. And yeah, let's begin this power rankings and we start off with number 23 and this team stays where they were last week, and that, of course, is the Quakes. So, yes, the Quakes, of course, have won a game since the last time we did this power rankings. They, of course, beat FC Dallas, but they also have lost a game, and that, of course, was against the Whitecaps. I mean, when you see that, that usually means that a team does not moved up, and that win against FC Dallas, I could kind of maybe put an asterisk in terms of that win because, it was a 4-3 win for us. We kind of outscored the opponent without playing very well, and especially our defending was absolute garbage. And in that Vancouver game, it just showed that we just had nothing to show for, and that it felt like the team just never showed up whatsoever. So, yeah, the Quakes remain at the bottom, and in 22nd, it is a team that I get to mention only once until middle of September, and that, of course, is Chicago, who, like I said, from last week, they do not have a game for a very long time. And I'm guessing that's probably a blessing in disguise if you're a Chicago Fire fan, because that has not been a good season. And also, someone in the comments said that I should do episode number 2 on the Chicago Fire in terms of the moving forward series. Well, the thing is that if the Chicago Fire does get eliminated faster than, let's say, maybe the Rapids would be, or even Houston getting eliminated in the playoffs, then I would, of course, do Chicago. I only do the moving forward series when the team gets eliminated in playoff contention, and when we get to the playoff round, once those team gets eliminated, and well, once each team gets eliminated, then that's when I do the moving forward series. But yeah, in 21st, and this team lost 5 spots from last week, and that, of course, is the Galaxy. And I believe just 2 weeks ago, I put the Galaxy right around the same spot, although I think this is still the lowest that they have gone this season. And, a lot of Galaxy fans wouldn't be complaining the fact that I put them down here, because it is truly the lowest point of the season for the Galaxy. You thought the 5-0 drumming against the Sounders was really bad? Yeah. How about a 6-2 loss against RSL and just the defense completely gone shambolic again? And what's more frustrating about this loss is that at least in that Sounders versus Galaxy game, the Galaxy were kind of a little bit short-strength in that game. This game, they had most of their starters in this game, and yet they still lost 6-2. And this was also a game that they had Zlatan in the game, and they still lost 6-2. So this has to be, that RSL game that they lost, that has to be the worst loss of the season, and probably the rock bottom part of the season. But in 20th, this team stays the same spot, and that, of course, is Orlando City. So, have Orlando City lost their match against the Union, then I would think that they would be falling down my power rankings again. I'll probably maybe put them in 22nd, but they did drew against the Union. They got a last-minute goal to draw against the Union, although if you ask any Orlando City fans, they would say that that goal that they scored, that equalizer that they scored, really did not help them whatsoever. I mean, it just moved one more step closer to them getting eliminated in the playoffs. And yeah, Orlando, of course, in 20th. And in 19th place, this team lost 2 spots from last week. And that, of course, is Houston. And for the Dynamos, it just gets even worse as each games go. Like the Galaxy, of how each game seems to be worse, it's the same thing for the Dynamo. 4-2 loss against FC Dallas in a game that the defense just completely fall asleep, and the attack just didn't do much in the game. And it feels like right now the Dynamos, they're losing game not because the fact that they are blowing leads late, but it's because they're losing games because they're bad in the first place and they just get outplayed for the full 90 minutes instead of the last 10 minutes of the game. But in 18th place, and this team, I actually moved them up 2 spots, and I actually didn't want to move them up 2 spots, but because the fact that they got a draw against the Timbers, and that teams like Houston and the Galaxy, both of them lost big games. That is exactly why I decided to move the Reds up a little bit, because those 2 losses by both of those teams were very bad, and both of those teams were in very bad form lately. But even though I moved them up 2 spots, there's really nothing Revs fans should be happy about, because they did drew against the Timbers, and that winless run just continues for the Revs. I mean, they have not won a game since June 30th, I believe, against DC United, which is a long time ago. So, yeah, the Revs, of course, in 18th place. And notice how, of all the teams that I put so far in the bottom 5 and the bottom 6, and I'm actually going to put the next team up, which, of course, is Colorado. And I'm actually also going to put 16th place up, which, of course, is Minnesota, because both of these teams did not play this week. Colorado actually moved up 2 spots, and the same goes with Minnesota. And it's pretty much the same reason I said about New England, and how teams like the Galaxy and Houston, since they had a horrible kind of week, they kind of took their spots in the power rankings. But if you look at the teams right now that is in the bottom 7 or 8 right now in my power rankings, these are all teams that is going to miss the playoffs this year. Well, potentially going to miss the playoffs. Maybe New England still might have a chance, but you can say that all these teams pretty much just lost hope. Or actually, you can say the Galaxy might still have a chance if they can just sort it out for this final month. But yeah, these are kind of the hopeless teams so far, and the teams that is kind of in a crisis. And speaking of crisis, I wouldn't put that word into this team that I put, which is TFC, but it kind of felt like it is kind of a crisis. I mean, a 4-2 loss against LAFC, back-to-back loss to conclude what probably is the worst week for TFC, and certainly the week that they desperately did not want to see. I mean, this was a week where they needed to potentially make up ground, and this was potentially a good week to do it, because they do play against Portland, and then they have to play against LAFC, and both of those teams were good teams, but those are 2 teams that you would think that potentially they could win, especially with Portland, of how bad they were coming into that game against TFC, haven't won a game in 4 matches, and LAFC kind of struggling for the past month. It's pretty clear that TFC hope of making the playoff is potentially going to be closing. And I don't know if that is a good or a bad thing. I guess it's a good thing that TFC does miss the playoffs, considering the fact that they are going to be back in CCL, and I'm pretty sure Greg Vanny will be focusing on that tournament. Now, the fact that they'll probably won't be making the playoffs this season, they get more rest before CCL start. But having said that, missing the playoffs, you were the defending champion and you missed the playoffs, which was kind of interesting, because if you look at the past couple of champions we have in MLS, most of them actually missed the playoffs the very next year. I know the Timbers missed the playoffs back in 2016 when they won the whole thing. I know, or not 2016, but 2015 actually. 2016 was Seattle, which they made the playoffs, and it looks like it's going to be the same thing for TFC in 2017, where they're going to miss the playoffs right after they win the whole thing. And usually teams that actually get to the final and they win the whole thing, usually those teams does not do very well the very next year. And I don't know why exactly that is the case. My only logical reason why those teams does not do as good as the previous year when they won the whole thing is probably fatigue issue, and how they had such a long kind of year with all that postseason run, and that the next season that fatigue kind of comes into the play. And speaking of fatigue, that might be a thing that TFC is kind of suffering right now. Although you could also say that the other things that is an issue for TFC is that they have a lot of injury on this team. Victor Vasquez actually came off around the 15th minute in that game, so apparently he is not fit to return from injury. I think he had like a back injury coming into this game, and they thought he was ready for it. But yeah, for TFC, they of course are in 15th place, and in 14th place, speaking of the Timbers, that's where they are. So the Timbers didn't make any spot because although they did beat TFC just a couple of days ago, they did draw against New England, and they probably should have won that game against New England if Lucas Nano didn't just miss an absolute sitter from 3 yards out. But yeah, Portland, of course, stays in 14th position, and in 13th position, this team moved up 2 spots from last week, and that, of course, is Montreal. And Montreal is probably the biggest winner in terms of this week's playoff race in the Eastern Conference, besides probably DC United, because Montreal with a big 3-0 win against the Red Bulls, a very dominant 3-0 win against the Red Bulls. And, you know, I know some people are kind of writing off Montreal to potentially make the playoffs because of the fact that they have played the most game in the Eastern Conference. But hey, you know, if Montreal can still win rest of the game, and the teams that have game in hand over them, you know, those are the teams that they of course need to win those games in hand. And I guess in a psychological way, you can say those teams that have games in hand does have more pressure now that Montreal has continued to try to win games and trying to distance themselves despite the fact that they have played the most games in the Eastern Conference. Well, won the most game in the Eastern Conference. But in 12th place, this team stays where exactly they are from last week, is Vancouver. So the Whitecaps, of course, got a big win against the Quakes, but I'm going to put them at the same spot as they were last week because they beat the Quakes. And right now, I don't know if I can put Vancouver higher than it is where they are right now, because the team that is above them either have a very good winning streak going on, or the fact that they're just kind of like an elite team. You know, Vancouver, it's a team that it's kind of hard to figure it out, because there's sometimes they look very decent and they can go toe-to-toe against a big team, but then there are other times where they just look absolutely dreadful. So it's a very kind of strange team to kind of figure it out, but it is also a team that is chasing for that playoff spot in the Western Conference, and they of course are putting pressure on teams like Portland and Seattle and RSL to potentially get that 6th spot. But in 11th place, this team dropped 2 spots from last week, and that of course is NYCFC. And you know, if you're an NYCFC fan, there's got to be a little bit of concern with your team. I mean, I know I said that they're kind of like in this situation where they're probably not going to finish in the top 2 because Atlanta and the Red Bulls are building a 6-point gaps over them, and I think they have now built actually the gap stays the same because the Red Bulls and Atlanta didn't win this week, but they also are 6 points or 8 points ahead of Columbus, although that gap is now at 5 points because Columbus did win this week. But at the same time, you know, you cannot just go into the playoffs in this kind of form, because if NYCFC goes into the playoff in this form, then it's just going to be the annual choke job by NYCFC. It's going to be the annual first round exit or the second round exit, depending if they get a bye. And it's just going to be one and done again for NYCFC. And it's such a shame that that has to happen again, because I thought this year this team actually played very decently. And it's unfortunate that they had to switch a manager after Patrick Vieira decided to leave and go back to Europe to manage his new club Nice. But at the same time, you kind of also should think that NYCFC, despite the fact that they did change manager and Dom Touré, and ever since he has come into this team, certainly have not stabilized the team whatsoever. They got to get this right in these last couple of months, because right now, if you're an NYCFC fan, it's not good enough to just get into the playoffs. I mean, obviously, they expect their team to get into the playoffs, but it's all about now, when they get to the playoffs, they don't just immediately just choke, get away, and just take a first round exit like they have been in the last couple of years. But in 10th place, this team moves up 3 spots from last week, and despite the fact that DC United did take what looked like was potentially a season kind of ending loss against the Union, because I thought that was the one that will really kind of put a big nail in their coffin, considering the fact that they lose that game against a team that they're chasing for in the playoff race, and the fact that they have Atlanta coming up next. That is going to be probably the final nail in the coffin with their loss against Atlanta when they lost back-to-back games, and that confidence level that they had a couple of weeks ago is going to slowly dive down. But they beat Atlanta, and certainly that momentum is now back to where it was a couple of weeks ago, and it's going to be interesting to see this month and next month, can they continue this momentum? Although they do have a big game against NYCFC coming up next, and that is certainly a game that they could potentially pick up points, because NYCFC is really slumping right now. But, for DC United, a massive win against Atlanta, but now let's see if they can potentially do it on the road too and continue a very good form. And speaking of the Union, that's where they are in 9th place, and the Union, with that win against DC United, I really think they are now lock up their place in that 5th spot in the playoffs. I mean, they're just 10 points ahead of the next team that they're chasing for the playoff, which is New England, although they have 2 games in hand over New England. So the Union, I'm pretty sure it's a lock for them to be in the playoffs, which is certainly a massive achievement, consider the fact that this team was kind of struggling earlier in the season, but it felt like this team finally turned it on, and certainly this team has a lot of talented youngster on their team, and probably the most standout player on this team, I think out from the last couple of games where they have been in just a very good streak, is Corey Burke. I mean, Corey Burke is just scoring goals for fun right now. He's doing something that CJ Sapon and David Akam was supposed to do, but instead, it's Corey Burke, the one that is running the show, and I just think that, certainly I think Jim Curtin will continue to put him in that starting 11 and in that striker role, and if he can continue this form into the playoff, watch out. The Union could be a very kind of dark horse team, and could be a team that can surprise everybody and potentially make a good run into the playoffs. But moving on into the 8th spot, this team moved up 2 spots, and this is also a team that is in a very red hot form, and that of course is RSL, who is just a free scoring team right now. I mean, 12 goals in the last 2 games, becoming the first team ever in MLS history to score 6 goals in back-to-back games. And although you could say that the one against the Rapids, they were up 2 men and they pretty much just took advantage of that. And then the one against the Galaxy, which we know the Galaxy defense is utter garbage, it is still a very impressive performance by RSL, and it's just such an incredible kind of out of nowhere performance from this team, because we were talking about a couple of weeks ago, this team was in danger of falling out of the playoffs, but then they got some big wins, and now they just cannot stop scoring. Their midfield is just back to it was last season when it was very good. And yeah, RSL is really making noise, and certainly we'll see if their goal scoring kind of just bombardment will continue throughout these next couple of games. But right now they are just red hot as we speak. But in 7th place, this team dropped 3 spots from last week, and that, of course, is Sporting KC. So, Sporting KC winning streak comes to an end in the hand of a team that is the hottest team in MLS, which is the Seattle Sounder, and their clean sheet streak has also ended, and the goals that the time that they have not allowed a single goal in a stretch of 300 plus minutes is also gone. And all I have to say about Sporting KC is that, yes, it was definitely a tough loss against the Sounders, but now they got to make sure in the next game they will rebound and be prepared for the next game. But in 6th position, moving up 2 spots from last week, it's FC Dallas. So Dallas, of course, moved up 2 spots from last week because they got the El Capitan win against Houston, and they also won El Capitan. And for those people that thought FC Dallas was going to have a massive collapse again like last season, I don't know what in the world were you thinking. Like, I know FC Dallas did drop their game against the Quakes, but, first of all, it feels like the only Achilles heel for Dallas so far this season has to be the Quakes, and the fact that the Quakes are not going to come anywhere close in the playoffs. In fact, I shouldn't even say playoffs because they're done. They're eliminated from the playoffs. So they are not going to meet them again throughout this season. I really think that for people saying that this Dallas team is going to go on a collapse, I don't know what were you thinking, and did you not see how Dallas has been playing throughout this season? But overall, I think for Dallas, it's a very decent team, but the question is, when they do get to the playoffs, can they potentially beat one of those bigger teams like Seattle or Sporting KC and all those other teams in the playoffs? Because I have seen so far this season, when they do play against teams that is near the top part of the Western Conference, they tend to struggle against those teams. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens when they do get to playoffs, and whether or not, if us not really kind of rating Dallas and just kind of ignoring them, thinking that they'll just kind of collapse when the playoffs comes, we'll see if that is actually a thing, a true fact, or we were all being proven wrong once again by Dallas. But in 5th place, this team moved up 1 spot from last week, and that, of course, is Columbus. And Columbus with a big win against NYCFC, a much-needed win, considering the fact that at one point it looked like the Union was actually going to move up 4th place. And, they able to just retain their 4th position for now. But, like I said, with the Crew, they need to, of course, keep it going and try to distance themselves against the Union and try not to lose that home field advantage that they're going to get in the first round of the playoffs. Because if they go down to 5th place, then they will lose that home field advantage. And pretty much when they play against the Union, that game is going to be at Philly. And yeah, it's definitely not going to be an easy kind of trip for Columbus to potentially move on into the next round of the playoffs if they drop down to 5th. But in 4th place, this team lost 1 spot from last week, and that, of course, is the Red Bulls. So the Red Bulls, of course, did win their game against Houston, but they took a surprising loss to Montreal, and in a game where they just did not show up whatsoever. And in many ways, it was probably the worst performance by a Chris Armour Red Bulls team that I have seen so far this season. And, you know, the good news for them is that Atlanta also lost this week, which give them a bit of a break in terms of them keeping pace with Atlanta for that Supporters Shield race. But having said that, you could also say that this was a missed opportunity for them to control their own destiny in the Supporters Shield race if they would have won this game against Montreal. But in third place, this team moved up 4 spots from last week, and that, of course, is LAFC, who, like I said, they were kind of in a little bit of a slump a couple of weeks ago, but now that they are starting to pick it up again, and, you know, it was a big win against TFC on the road, nevertheless, 4-2. And there's been a couple of times when they go to an Eastern Conference opponent, they have post up big wins and big goal scoring number too. I remember earlier in the season against Montreal, they put 5 past them, and in this game they put 4 past TFC in this one. So, you know, LAFC moved up to third place, and in second place, this team actually lost 1 spot. And this is one of the rare times that I actually do not put Atlanta at the top spot. And the reason why I did not put them at the top spot is because they lost this week. And the team that is in that top spot is going to be the Seattle Sounders. And there should be no debate that they belong in that top spot, because they have the longest winning streak right now in MLS. And they are the hottest team in MLS right now. Now, one thing I do kind of have to warn you, Sounders fan. Remember a couple of weeks ago that I put your Cascadia neighbor Portland Timbers up here in the first spot and overtook Atlanta, and you saw how that went with Portland, of them just losing 4 straight in a row. You know, maybe it can happen to you too. Although, I will say this, if it does happen, don't blame me. Okay, I'm not a football god. I'm not a football kind of conspiracy theory or a superstition guy, or just a guy that curse your team or jinx your team. But I'm just kind of saying that, you know, last time I put someone that is not named Atlanta in that first spot, that team suffered big consequences. And I just think when you look at Seattle right now, I don't think they're gonna lose 4 in a row. There's just no way that I'm seeing the way that this team, which has just been so much better than they were the last couple of weeks, and how I just feel like they are a team that not only have looked so much better on the attacking side, but the defense is just unstoppable right now. Although in the next game, they probably might be facing a suspension with Chad Marshall getting a red card. Although, like I said back in the review, that red card was complete BS, and I expect Disco to overturn that red card, and Chad Marshall should be available in the next game. But either way, that is pretty much it for my power rankings. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think of my power rankings? Did I rank your team a little bit too high? Did I rank your team a little bit too low? But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time.